I'm surprised you
Shane
died.
Roberts.
All right, it is 6:30. I'm going to call this study session, the Livingston City Council, January 24th, 2023 to order. All of council except Mayor Pro Tem Ryden is present currently. I hear her walking down the hall though as well, so she should be here momentarily. We've got two items on the, it's just the assistant city manager. Two items to presentations and discussion tonight. First is Transportation Master Plan Annual Report, and then we'll do some appropriation update for the council retreat. I'm going to turn over to the city manager to introduce us for the.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, members of the council. The Transportation Master Plan was adopted in October of 2019. I believe that timing followed very intentionally the Envision Bulletin process so that the TMP and the can carry and reflect those vision points from that process. Since then, there's been a whole lot of progress on the plan. The actual plan, I know, is a document in excess of 100 pages, and council was emailed the link to that actual plan report. That document lives on the website for citizens and any other interested party.
It isn't entirely easy to find when you when you type in Transportation Master Plan. Not the first thing that pops up there.
That's a correct statement.
Not the 10th thing that pops up.
Transportation. Need the management plan first.
So noted. So, but what was in your packet originally and will be the focus tonight is the update on the plan, just the key projects that have been completed and those things in the works. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Public Works Utilities Director, Keith Reister, who will, I believe, introduce our other capable staff tonight and take the presentation. Shane.
This is Shane. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah.
Is he capable staff?
Yeah, really.
No, that's why I pointed to him, because I'm not capable. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Should I go ahead and just?
No, you just introduce
Okay.
yourself. Dr.
Yeah, Shane Roberts. I'm a senior transportation planner with the city of Littleton, so I think most of us have met, but good to see you guys again.
So Shane's been with us a couple years now, and he was a solo transportation planner until recently when Kenna joined us, who's over in the back as well. So what one of the things that we talked about when I met with council in the first year or so that I got here, I remember going to the retreat and we brought in 3 boxes, file boxes of plans that had been done for the city, but like 3 of them had been adopted, only a few had been executed. And so when we went through the Envision process, we did the Transportation Master Plan in parallel to that because the city had never done a Transportation Master Plan. And so we wanted to make sure that the things that were in the Transportation Plan were wrapped around the core values that are in Envision. So then as part of that, we made a commitment with the TMP that we would come back to council and the community on a regular basis in between major updates of the plan to share with the progress that we've made, the projects that we've done, and how we're really doing against the goals that we set as a community. That's not really a practice we've had in the past, and so that's why we're here to share that information tonight. I think you're gonna see some great stuff in here. And when we think about a transportation master plan, the time horizon on doing stuff in that document is 40 years. When you really think about it, some of those things that are in there. But you'll also see that we've been able to pick up quite a lot of momentum and speed on that. And we're really progressing rapidly. and
40
that's
years
an
is good
exciting
for Littleton, because that's about how often we change.
Yeah, exactly. Well, last time since we never had one, we'll wait till like 2102
There you
to
go.
redo this next one. But the schedule for the plan updates is we are planning to do those on 5-year windows. So we adopted this in the fall of 2019. So our plan window to do an update to the full transportation master plan is in the tail end of 2024. But we're also doing a series of plan and other work now that's feeding into that update in terms of data, community work, and those kind of things. And Shane's going to touch on that as well. So.
All right, well, thanks. Keith teed me up pretty nicely, so we'll just dive in here. So I think most of you were, or not most of you, but some of you were on council in 2019 when the TMP was passed. But just to give kind of a high-level overview of the TMP. So like Keith said, it was adopted in 2019. Overall, it was an 18-month project. And throughout that 18 months, there was a really intensive public engagement portion where we really went out to the public and said, hey, what do you want? What are your needs? What do you want to see in the TMP? And so through that, there were over 92,000 touch points via email and social media, 8,300 conversations with members of the public and stakeholders, and 261 different events. So it's a pretty extensive public engagement process. Through that public engagement process, there were 5 goals that Keith mentioned, and these are the 5 goals that the plan has decided, these are the things we're going to try to accomplish with all of our actions. And so the goals are connected, healthy, inclusive, prosperous, and sustainable. And so an easy way to remember this is by the acronym CHIPS. So if you love CHIPS, you're going to love our Transportation Master Plan. And so the way the Transportation Master Plan works is it starts with these 5 goals. Those goals feed into policies, which feed into objectives and feed into actions. And so tonight we're going to talk about the actions we've taken largely over the last few years to accomplish these goals. So these are some action highlights, but I'm going to kind of skip over these because we're going to dive into some of these. So I don't want to kind of belabor the point. If we need to come back, though, I'm happy to come back. So of the recommendations of the TMP, here's some kind of more detailed a view of what the TMP recommends. So there's 140 different projects that the TMP recommends, 13 new programs and initiatives, 4 new sets of transportation standards, and 7 new partnerships and coordinations. And so that was part of the TMP in 2019. So in 2021, staff came together and said, okay, it's time to do a report on the progress that we've made so far. That's when we started this process. And so from there, we looked at the 31 objectives from the TMP and worked with a consultant team to come up with 80 different data points to track how we're progressing on accomplishing the goals and the projects laid out in the TMP. So from these 80 different data points, there's actually 3 different types of data that we looked at. The first is project progress, and this is probably the one that the public is most familiar with, right? Seeing the projects we're accomplishing. After that, we look at transportation data, just raw data, so traffic volume, safety figures, things like that. And then the final one we look at is public perceptions and surveys to judge how we're doing or see trends in transportation. So,
Is that done in tracking?
which part of it?
This setting up your milestones?
No, so because this is the first time we did this, we kind of have done it right now in a spreadsheet that we're tracking. And so I think probably as we go forward, though, a better system for how we do that. Part of our asset management system will probably feed into that.
Yeah.
So as
Spend a lot of money for a mouse to use it.
right, yeah. So as projects are accomplished, those things are kind of checked off, so.
I have a question.
Sure.
That just, it's burning in me. So at the end of every chapter, there was a list of projects, and then there was a list of projects at the end.
Mhm.
I could never connect the two.
Okay.
So how did you decide on which projects to work on?
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors that go into that. Some of them are targets of opportunity. So as we know something needs to be fixed, we look at the other projects around that area and say, hey, it would cost us, let's say, $10,000 to do it on its own, but if we did it as part of this project, it would only cost us $5,000. And obviously those are kind of just numbers, but that's one way. Grant opportunities are another way that we look at that. So we had this list of projects, but as grant opportunities come out, they have a list of criteria that we need to meet. And so we'll take projects that fit that best and apply it to the grant opportunity. And sometimes that means combining projects into one.
We also, one of the other things that, our much more aggressive work on asset management has allowed us to be better partners with other people that are building in the community, whether it's developers, whether it's utilities, whether it's other cities that join us. And so it's allowed us to get out ahead. I mean, the biggest nightmare for a public works director is paving a road and then like 3 days later, somebody comes and cuts a hole in it. Right? And so part of that asset management is to get ahead of that so that you can work with Excel, you can work with your other utilities. And so we also work with them to facilitate their work as well as ours. And so that can be part of the discussion, the decision as well.
So is there a connection between the projects at the end and the projects at the end? What is the connection? I'm curious. I tried to map them and I couldn't.
They are weaved together, but it's those are, okay, so each chapter is a target.
Okay,
And so you don't all the projects that are listed there might not be in the final master list because they'll be sorted out into the final master list. The list you have at the end is the highest priority list based on the rating at the time we did the report.
okay.
That's what that is.
And then it, based on what you just said, you may reach into some of the chapter projects if whatever, all these criteria are met.
Yeah, or, you know, I mean, that's the basis of it, but then if something comes up, we're like, oh, you know, if we're, an example of that is when we, let's go, we slurry seal a street, right? Well, we're gonna take the opportunity when we restripe that to maybe take advantage of adding a bike lane on the sides, just with the restriping, because we gotta restripe it anyway. So that's where we take
Thank
that
you for
opportunity.
explaining, because it was hard for me to figure that out. Okay, thank you.
Great, so we'll dive in here to the progress that we've made on the recommended projects. So not to overwhelm you with detail, but there's kind of generally three types of projects that the TMP recommends, and the first of which is auto and freight, right? So this is how do we move cars more efficiently down our streets and through our intersections. So there's 47 recommended projects from that final list of projects in the TMP, and the city has made progress on 25 of those 47. And so if you see this chart here in the middle of the screen, this shows you how many projects are kind of in each project stage. So we have 10 that are in the planning or the study stage, 9 that are in the design stage, and 6 that are in the construction or in some cases have already been installed. So. And as you might imagine, the projects that are recommended in TMP really run the gamut in terms of magnitude, right? So there's big projects that a lot of people see that you probably know about because you've probably gotten calls about them, all the way to little projects that, you know, if you didn't know tonight, you may not know that they were going on. So one example of this is Federal and Bowles. So Federal and Bowles was one of the recommended projects from the TMP. It was reconstructed in 2020, and before its reconstruction, it was regularly on our list of top intersections for accidents in terms of overall number of accidents. It was also top in terms of injury accidents and top in terms of car-bike accidents. So clearly this is an intersection where we were worried about safety of people. So after this intersection was reconfigured, and the graphic here kind of shows you the layout of it, overall accidents dropped between 65 and 75%. Injury accidents also dropped by about 65%. And since the intersection has been redone, we haven't had any reports of car-bike accidents. So we're really excited about that. So there's an example of kind of a larger project. But then on the smaller end, this project on the right is the Signal Interconnect project on Broadway. So this is a grant-funded project through Dr. Cog, and it looks to establish fiber communications down Broadway from Powers Ave to Arapahoe Road and replace all the equipment and all those signals that you see on that section of Broadway. So even though this is as a driver or as a resident, you may not see any changes. You know, you might see some of the fiber being installed, but you wouldn't see, you know, a brand new intersection or anything like that. But the reason this is significant is because upgrading equipment allows us to put in safer phasing. And so one example is leading pedestrian interval, and this is where if you're ever stopped at a light and you're in an all red phase or all the cars are stopped and you see the pedestrians go first, that's called the leading ped interval. But the controllers we have at some of the intersections on Broadway don't allow us to do that. So these new controllers, this new equipment will allow us to do that. And we know that small changes like that allow us to make safety upgrades to our intersections. So that's just kind of the range of projects that we're dealing with from an auto and freight standpoint. So any questions on those before we? Well, okay.
Where does the Clarkson project come in?
The Clarkson.
Clarkson. Thanks for closing the door, by the way, Gretchen.
I'm not familiar. Are you familiar with the?
No,
Yeah, is that Littleton or is that Arapahoe County? Because it's all goofy over there with Arapahoe County, Greenwood. Oh, just east of the stadium.
it's a Centennial project.
It's,
in Greenwood Village.
Oh,
but it's,
okay.
part of it's Arapahoe, part of it's Little. I was talking to
Yeah,
the
it's-
residents. In
it's
fact,
very-
I'm going to a meeting there next
We,
week.
all of those, where we have the joint situations, we just work with our partners to try and figure something out. I don't know the specifics on that one right now, Jerry, but I can get back to you.
If you will, because I'm going to a meeting Thursday, resident
Okay,
meeting.
sure, we'll meet you then.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I'll send you a reminder.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so the next type of project that the TMP recommends are active transportation projects or bike ped projects. And so The TMP recommends 77 different active transportation projects, and the city has made progress on 27 of those. It's also important to point out that of that list of 144 projects, that active transportation projects are the largest chunk of those. And that's because as an organization, as staff, we see the importance of bike ped projects. One, because we want to provide mobility choice to residents who don't have a car, but also because it just makes things safer for everyone, because it's easier to drive, it's easier to walk, it's easier to bike if you know where you're supposed to be on the street. And so establishing those dedicated facilities are something that we focused on.
I'll bring it up right now with that slide, just because it's there. I was gonna bring it up at the end, but I mean, I think one of the issues that I wanted to raise was, I think we had a conversation, I don't know, a couple months ago, specifically with the Prince Street bike lane. And it kind of seemed like there was like a chicken and an egg with protected bike lanes, having equipment to service them versus building them and things like that. And so, I wanted to, looking at the transportation master plan, one, it's out of date because of lots of different things, because it's 4 years old now. But with the buffered lanes versus protected lanes, where's staff at that with this?
So I'll take that question. So protected bike lanes are, as we've seen across the country, are appropriate in some situations and some not. And cities, admittedly cities that have snow, have struggled a little bit with the implementation of divided bike lanes, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. To be honest with you, our biggest challenge, adding a separated bike lane is mostly right-of-way limitations in our city because we're an old city. That's our biggest challenge to start with. But once we get them in, the challenge of dividing the bike lane creates some operational challenges, whether it's for plowing the street or whether it's for plowing the actual lane itself. Those are going to be challenging. And there's some places that the research around the country and the experimentations have shown that, depending on the volume and all those things, it's finding the right mix of where a protected bike lane would be. They're certainly in our palette of designs, and we're looking at those alternatives, but there's none right now that are right at the top of the list at this point. That's part of the reason why we're doing the corridor study on Broadway. We just put in a grant application to do a corridor study on Bowles so that we can start to integrate that network more fully. And I'm supportive of that direction because, the analogy I give on that is that I think of bike lanes in terms of ski slopes. And if you have a family, they need to have a green run to get all the way through. But if you have 3 blocks of a black slope in the middle of that, it's basically a black bike lane in terms of ability to ride because it's more technical and hard. So those are the places we're going to have to tackle that. We're just working our way into that as we do it. I'll be honest, part of our biggest challenge has been staffing because this, Shane's been working on this and we finally added another transportation planner. That's going to allow us to dive more into that as well. So.
I mean, as I see some of the, whatever it is, 92 on the transportation master plan with like Windermere and Prince that had, a project as protected bike lane. And those are not protected, haven't come, they've, been striped. And not even, things like thinking about putting the parked car between traffic and the bike lane.
There's 2 parts to that. We need to make sure we're working with the police to execute those. Because there's that part of it, the enforcement side of it. So we're still working through that. The other part of it is a money issue, because this is the first year we've had money.
Right.
So that's the second part. And to go to this particular spot, one of the commitments in the TMP is in this phasing that we're doing now is to update the bike and pedestrian plan. Because that was done in 2012 in this community. And that's something that we identified that after the TMP was done, that's one of the pillars that we then are taking on. And that's something that we have planned in the next 18 months.
Okay.
So we'll be able to tackle that at that point.
Okay, yeah, I just wanna, express that, I wanna see.
Oh, no, I agree.
A priority here, and, we hear from people, it's hard because you say, there's not that many bikers, it doesn't make sense to do it, but it's, if you don't have the infrastructure in place, they're not gonna bike.
Right, I totally agree with that. We have, if you think about the Mary Carter, it is probably the most highly used bike facility in Colorado, without question. And so it's integration to those things. How do we attach into that? It's like the Slaughterhouse Gulls project, for example. So, as you know, as a rider, it's an iterative process, and as we tackle some of those bigger projects, we're going to be able to integrate that as we go.
Especially, take a look at the, I know we have the school buffers as well, and a lot of those places could use improvement for walkers and bikers.
Well, Shane is going to talk about safe routes to school here in a little bit.
Yeah, that's actually a great segue kind of into this project on the left side. So here's an example of a PED project that's a little more expensive. So this is the pedestrian crossing at Federal and Berry. And so if you're driving down Federal and Crossberry, you may think that it is just it's a normal traffic light, but this is really intended to get peds across the street. And the reason that we place this here is specifically to get kids across the street, across Federal Boulevard, so they can access Centennial Academy or go further west to Goddard. So this is an example also of a grant-funded project. This was funded through Safe Routes to School, which leads into the other Safe Routes to School. So we call them designated school routes, but we recently worked with LPS to reevaluate the school routes and determine, are these still the best routes? We found that for the most part they're the most correct routes, but like you mentioned, a lot of the sidewalks are not ADA compliant. We say we want kids to bike here, but we may not have bike facilities, and so this will be one of the focuses moving forward, and even crossings as well. We have a few places where we want kids to cross the street, but we don't have a marked crossing. So certainly bike and ped upgrades with a focus on school routes is something that will be coming. So.
And I would just say, in terms of the Federal Berry crossing, it was not a quick project. There were a lot of different owners involved with that, and from South Suburban and the school district to the private property owners, and then federal funds. So none of these things can just get, rubber stamped and go through. It probably took us at least 2 years to even get through that process to make those improvements. But stuck with it.
Yeah. And then as Keith mentioned earlier with the striping of bike lanes, so this project on the right is Shepherd Avenue from Gallup to Bannock. So in 2021, I believe we had some CVG, some funding to expand the sidewalk, make it ADA compliant on the north side, and we repaved Shepherd at the same time. So we could have gone back in and just put the striping back as it was before, but we saw an opportunity because the TMP recommends a bike lane here in both directions to go in and put in a bike lane. And in terms of additional cost, you're talking pennies per linear foot to go and put down striping. So this is an example of a target of opportunity where we can spend very little money to accomplish some of the projects in the TMP. So, any questions on these?
There's more projects in District 1 like you did on.
Okay, sure, yeah, I'll write that down.
I love the grant for Bowles Avenue, that's
Yeah.
10, 15 years overdue. So
Yeah.
we're on a roll.
We are.
Yeah.
It's true.
All right. And the last project type are transit projects. So the TMP recommends 17 different transit projects, but you'll notice the difference here with this chart is that we don't have several projects in each of the stages of design, and that's because of where transit is. As you probably know, service is down to 70% of pre-pandemic levels in the RTD district. Ridership is down to 65%. I think last time I was here, we talked about that. And so really transit is a big question mark. So it's not that we're not looking at transit, but we're also being cautious to not, throw a lot of money into design or to construction when we don't know what the future of transit looks like. So we're still looking at it, especially when opportunities come up to study it as part of the larger transportation network. But we're just kind of waiting, so.
With transit, with
Yep.
RTD, and with the announcement of the seat line going away, was staff in that conversation? Was it aware of it? Did they, I know they announced it, I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't,
So I've sat on the RTD Reimagine Committee for technical working team for sometime before COVID. And when COVID hit and the change, what that really did is it created a pivot within the Reimagine project that really focused on where do we need to go in the future. And so it's also a unique opportunity as transit is reinvigorated to deploy those new opportunities that wouldn't have been available when the system was operating robustly. The biggest challenge, as you know, for RTD is just a massive reduction in ridership. And they have a huge funding gap, they have an operator gap. And so from that particular thing, they came to us and said, when COVID started, we're just gonna go to the D line for now. And, you know, we continue to work with them. There's other routes in town and, you know, we just continue to monitor their efforts and be in there with them, to talk through it. All of us are kind of in the same situation as communities out there. We have to look to our RTD board members to carry some of that torch sometimes.
I mean, have they been having those local government meetings? I know when I was the liaison several years ago, you know, I would go to those meetings and have
There was a
they
pretty-
done that? I know Councilman Valdez, you're the liaison.
I haven't been.
There was
I
a
went to a
pretty,
couple meetings, but it kind of,
So
Yeah, there was
they
a
just
COVID.
haven't having any, or?
there was a pretty long pause during COVID. And then when they were getting the new general manager in and some other things, and RTD was kind of going through their strategic planning, they were on hold. I do anticipate, based on talking with the team up there, that they're gonna do more of those. I think they're also trying to rebound from a staff perspective, just to even be able to get out there and do them right now.
So if we can't have aware of that and get Councilman Valdez at those if they have them.
Am I the alt or are you the alt?
You're
Can't remember.
the,
It's been a while.
I thought I was the alt, but, okay, okay.
yeah, you were the,
I was thinking Kelly was.
I did go
that was.
initially, but then
previously.
COVID, it was like,
Okay. We'll follow up on
Let's just say Patrick was.
not anymore.
Just say Patrick.
Patrick, it
Just
was
say
you.
I've never done
I don't know, I know I haven't gone.
All right, so here's two project examples of how we're looking at transit. So this time I'm going to start on the right side of the screen. So the Downtown Mobility and Streetscape Improvement Plan, which you guys, I'm sure you've heard of. So we're just kind of wrapped up the process of evaluating consultant proposals and looking at that. But here's an example of where, you know, this whole project is looked at mobility overall in the downtown neighborhood, and transit is one facet of that, right? And so that's how we're examining transit. That's how we're taking opportunities like that to advance some of the recommendations in the TMP, at least from a study standpoint. So the project on the left is the Broadway Corridor Study, and this is probably more indicative of where transit is. So this is a grant-funded study through DRCOG that we applied for actually in 2019, right around the same time that the TMP was being worked on. Originally, if you remember, BRT on Broadway seemed like a sure thing at the end of RTD's BRT feasibility study. The idea with applying for this grant funding was that let's get ahead of this. Let's get some money to do our own study, do our own design, so that when BRT comes, you know, we're ahead of the curve. We've already talked to our citizens. We know what our citizens want. We've already designed some things, so we'd really be ahead of the ball. Well, since that time, more funding became available to deal with some problem points on Broadway, and of course, BRT, the momentum for it died. And so when funding became available for the Broadway Corridor Study, we thought, well, here's an opportunity rather than just to look at Broadway and Littleton. Why don't we reach out to our partners, other jurisdictions on Broadway, all the way up to Denver and all the way down to Highlands Ranch and everywhere in between, and look at Broadway more holistically for the region. And in the TMP or through the TMP research process, you might remember that one of the things that I don't know if it was Keith or the consultant team or a combination of the two discovered, but that Littleton had a rich history of being a leader when it came to transportation projects for the whole metro area, you know, despite our humble size. And so this is a great example of how we're trying to return to that, right? We're taking funding, we're reaching out to partners, we're being a leader in these regional projects, so.
So no more Bus Rapid Transit.
Oh, no, it'll be back. It's just a matter of, the BRT was, you know, they identified 4 corridors throughout the district which are the highest possibility of being successful. And, you know, all those projects are just on hold at this time until they were able to figure out the bigger nature of the system.
Wow.
You know.
That's a shame.
And I mean, all of us in the southern district, part of the district, also know that they're getting a huge amount of pressure from the north part of the district for undelivered promises. So we're gonna have to just wade through that as we go.
Yeah, I was at a meeting with kind of the I-25 corridor, Rockland County there, and they were looking with CDOT and talking about that. I think the Broadway BRT kind of is lower down the list. I know they talked about federal was one of the ones that they said they will have funding, but they were gonna stop in Sheridan.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know actually north of Sheridan, I think the Sheridan mayor and I were to say, hey, what can we do to bring it further down until
So this, I mean, the thing about doing a study like this is it allows us to integrate land use, utilities, all of those kind of things, economic development, so that we're poised for success as those opportunities become available. And we don't box opportunities out by decisions we make now that'll be impactful on a particular project 15 years down the road.
Does the TIP proposal actually allow for some of the land use planning along our corridors, like to engage in that part of the study beyond?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna, so the way TIP works is that we're committed to the scope that we have in our application. And so as long as we cover that scope in our application, we can kind of go beyond that. And
Okay.
so, yeah, so.
This is when we first started talking about this, it was really important to not look at our segment of Broadway in a vacuum. You know, the drivers they don't care where the borders are.
They don't know where the borders are.
No,
Right.
Well,
Some.
as we were just talking about, right, a second ago, so with the intersection, so yeah, that's part of it. It's important for us to make sure that we're interconnecting our plans, our TMPs with our neighbors, because transportation more than anything is regional, you know, and so we have to keep that as part of our planning.
Just as one more follow-up point to Councilmember Barr's question, sorry. This is a very important study for us, and I know, Keith's team is leading this, but it's also about economic development strategy and the evolution of that corridor, and that gets into the land use questions there. So while infrastructure and the kind of efficiency and feel of the corridor lead the way, this will also, give us really rich planning in planning and information as we go forward on the economic development front too.
Yeah, where I was kind of going with this is traditionally, if you submitted a TIP application prior to RTD crashing and burning, not to say that, but that scope can obviously be much bigger now than it was, and because Dr. Cox got new corridor-specific funding mechanisms now that we could add on to that work if that was not already included in that scope.
Right.
And even actually is one of the things that we have to do as part of a TIP application is we got to get concurrence.
Yeah.
So we have to get concurrence from other agencies. And some of them are helpful than others. And RTD is one we always get concurrence with on projects where there's going to be an integration at some level.
That's good.
All right, so those are kind of the types of projects the TMP recommends. So the next kind of data that we looked at to evaluate where we're at as part of the TMP is transportation safety data. So I've got lots of talking points for these. I know we're already a half hour in, so I can kind of go over these generally. If we have specific questions on them, feel free to stop me.
My question is, why are we using a 3-year rolling average for this?
Yeah, so I believe the reason for that was to determine trends versus like if we have years that are outliers, and so that's why, to kind of see the trends. So we do have raw numbers available though, so I'm happy to get you those. So but really, so the 4 crash statistics that we look at most are bike crashes, ped crashes, injury crashes, and fatal crashes. And so I can go through these, but just keep those in mind.
Does this include motorcycles and cyclists, or just?
Bicycles.
Yeah, so this is bicycle and car interactions. Yeah.
That's just.
Could be a bicycle and motorcycle.
Animals?
Yeah. No, I don't think so. So
That's another one.
Clear.
sure.
It's a tough
I'll
crowd.
throw you off here.
It's a tough
Yeah, so even though this is a 3-year rolling average, you can see that this has kind of been trending down since about 2018, the bike involved crashes. And so one example of why this is trending down is because of some of the fixes we're making. Federal and Bowles is a good example of that, right? That used to be one of our highest intersections for bike car crashes, and now we haven't seen any since its fixes. So ped involved crashes, this has remained pretty steady for the last decade. So obviously ped and bike focused projects are something that we're looking at, and a lot of those projects are in the planning or design stages, and we'll be delivering those soon. So hoping that these numbers will be impacted. But I did look at the raw numbers, and I think for 2021 there were only 8 ped car crashes. So the hope is that we continue to enact projects, so we'll keep that number lower, and we'll see this number go down a bit. Injury accidents, and so you can see here that since 2013, these have kind of, in the city of Littleton, they've been going down steadily. So the reason that this is kind of important is because, and why we pay attention to injury accidents. Just this morning on 9 News, they had a report about how 2021 was the worst year in about the last decade for ped crashes, bike crashes, injury crashes, and fatal crashes. So it's important that they look at those. And the numbers that we're seeing, even just the numbers that we have for the first 3 quarters of 2022 are showing that, we're not seeing a giant spike like everyone else. So
Was
that's
that
good.
statewide or just?
What's that?
Was that those numbers statewide for the
Statewide.
increase?
Yeah, I believe they're statewide from CDOT, yep.
Gazette had a good article on that today.
Does that have anything to do with the bikes now have the right of way?
I don't know.
That law hasn't been in effect for very long, so we haven't really been able to see the data on that from here. But other states that have the rolling stop, the Idaho stop as it's called, have seen positive impacts. So we'll be curious to see how that rolls out. No pun intended here in Colorado.
Yeah, there was a pretty robust Dr. Cog discussion about the same thing, and I think the data that they presented too also was really strong. I believe Inglewood adopted it into their, I'm not sure.
That is correct.
Okay, how was
The
that?
council adopted it and didn't consult with staff at all beforehand.
That's,
And there's 2 other mountain communities that had adopted the Idaho stop, and so I'm excited to see it in more metropolitan area,
Yeah.
more riders, to see how it really impacts the safety and the interaction with drivers.
What's this stop,
So basically, what it is you basically treat the intersection, if you're a bicyclist, as a yield sign. You look to make sure that you're safe, and then you can proceed through, even if the light is still red. That's the easiest way for me to describe
Yeah,
it.
I'd say that historically, bicyclists have supposed to obey all traffic signs similarly to drivers, although they never really have, but
This just took what they were already doing and made it legal.
pretty much.
the reasoning behind it too is that the less time a bicycle spends in an intersection, even at a stopped position, the less likely they are to be hit. Because even as they are stopped, they are more likely to intersect a car pulling a crazy right-hand turn.
Right here, the right-hand turn is the most dangerous move. A car making a right-hand turn is the most dangerous move for a bicycle.
And if you're not moving, it's harder to be seen, and the harder you are to be seen, the likelier you are to be hit.
Thanks for the
A moving
clarification.
target.
Anecdotally, I've had 2 friends that had were hit by cars, you just
Bicycling?
bicycling. Not motorbikes.
Or that's part of the
Yeah.
8.
I mean, horrible recoveries.
And that is PD data, right?
Yeah, and so that's a good point because we only have the ones that are in crash reports, right? So if there's some that are not reported, which is possible, then we wouldn't have those.
Right.
So
I fell off my bike one time. I don't think it's on.
You didn't it never shows.
Can we get a chart of Patrick Crisco's bike falls?
That's exactly right.
Couldn't clip fast enough. I literally fell right on top of the car. He was parked, I fell right on his hood.
Jeez.
Then we were both stopped, obviously. I was just like, she looked at me, she's like,
Really not?
just learning how to ride a bike. Clip.
Gotta loosen those clips up. Do you know how we compare to like the Centennial, Sheridan, Inglewood in terms of the ped bike injury reporting? Like, I know statewide, like that's kind of a different story, but like being in the South Metro, it's a little bit more apples to apples when you're looking at that data.
We haven't done that comparison. We can, but part of this is the first time we're rolling out a report like this. So I'm sharing this with my peers later this week, actually. So we'll talk through that and see if we can pull some data. And actually, I'm probably pretty sure that PD is already doing some of that comparative data. So we'll meet with them and talk through it. So I'm hopeful our numbers will be better.
Of that, was it 575 that were killed this past year? How many of those were bicyclists?
in the whole state,
Right.
yeah.
And I presume there were more of the urban for bicycles. They said car more rural, but I
Yeah.
presume bikes are more.
That's pretty common. The biggest outlier percentage in the crash, in the fatalities in Colorado, that's outsized versus the number of actual users is motorcycles. Because motorcycles makes up there's they're 2%, they estimate that 2% of vehicular trips in the state are by motorcycle. But the percentage of motorcycle deaths are very disproportionate to that number of lane miles traveled. So that's the biggest outlier versus the amount of time that someone spends in the system, is that particular category.
And are bicycles as a percentage higher than motorcycles?
No.
As far as usage?
That's a good question. I don't know if anybody's ever actually studied that, so.
Right, and then the last crash statistic here is fatal accidents or fatal crashes in the city of Littleton. And so even with a 3-year rolling average, because the absolute numbers in the city of Littleton are so low, it's hard to kind of, level out those trends. Something to note about all the fatal crashes in the city of Littleton, they're all related to circumstances kind of outside the realm of engineering. So high-speed chases, DUIs, freak accidents, things like that. So when we go back and we look at the fatal crashes, we always, injury crashes, fatal crashes, we look at the crash reports. And with the fatal crashes, it was some sort of circumstance like that. It wasn't, a bad intersection or anything like that, so.
Somebody going 85 miles an hour on a street that's designed to do 30, you can't engineer that out.
Right.
You can't engineer safety back into that situation, especially if they're under the influence.
Federal between Bellevue and Bowles, is that cleaned up now?
There's ongoing work out there too, though, so. But yeah, that's an example of one of those crashes, that's the exact description of what it was. You had a driver under the influence, exceeding, 80 miles an hour, 30 mile an hour posted zone. You can't engineer your way to safety there.
And there's a curve, yeah.
Yeah, injury.
So, any questions on that? Nope. Okay. All right. So that was a lot. So the way that the TMP kind of wraps that up nicely into a single concept is a high injury network. And so a high injury network is a Vision Zero tool. And it says rather than look at all the crashes that you have and just identify intersections with the most overall crashes, let's focus on those 4 types: the ped, the bike, the injury, and the fatal. And let's really direct our fixes there, because those are the crashes where people are going to get hurt or end up in the hospital. So the TMP identifies 15 intersections in the city of Littleton that are part of our high injury network, our local high injury network. Since the TMP was adopted in 2019, the city of Littleton has made progress on 11 of the 15. And so those are at various stages of the, various project stages, but some of them are installed like Federal and Bowles, and some of them we've identified funding and are starting the design process, so.
Is that one of them at the Highline Canal on Broadway? Is that what I'm seeing right there?
At Arapahoe, so that's, just north.
And I remember the former mayor of Cherry Hills Village, who's on the Arapahoe open space, they approved funding. Do you know, Keith, about that with the crossing for
Oh, yeah.
Highline with underneath?
We know a lot about that. So we're currently, we worked with Arapahoe County, kind of took the lead with the Highline Conservancy to look at all the series of crossings that exist sort of in Arapahoe County on the Highline and identify the highest. They went through a study looking at what ones had the highest crash incidences, and then also what ones you could engineer a reasonable solution. And so a lot of the answers to those are grade separation. And so we just received a grant award with Arapahoe County, Centennial, and Arapahoe County Open Space to look at a grade separation at that crossing. So we're at this point, we're going to proceed to 30% design. And then look at where we go. The next crossing over was much more technically difficult. You would have to basically build a tunnel. So that's why this one rose to the higher end of the list versus the other one. And so we're excited. This is a great partnership project, and we feel really excited that over the next few years we're going to be able to secure the $10 million that it's going to take as partners to deliver that project.
What was that cross section again?
Highline at Broadway.
Yeah, so just south of Arapahoe Road. Yeah.
There's 2 crossings, right? Oh, just the one across there.
Yeah, the other one would be quite a technical challenge. You basically have to bore a tunnel.
The other one is by Andy's, that yogurt.
Yeah, on Kaylee,
Yeah.
Can you explain your key? You have a star, a yellow star, a
Sure.
red, And a red and a yellow together and a star alone.
Yes, you had to memorize the TMPs in order, no, just kidding. Yeah, so the red are, those are the high injury intersections. The stars, those are bottleneck intersections. So in the TMP, I just pulled this straight from the TMP, so that's what those different symbols are identifying. So the difference here is, so this map on slide 17 shows the bottlenecks and the high injury intersections. The green circles those are the ones that we've made some progress on.
I cross Mineral and Broadway all the time and the cars are coming left as we're trying to go across and you have to watch them, that they won't in front of you.
That's rule number one for bicyclists and pedestrians, make eye contact with drivers. That's the number one safety tip you can give people when they cross.
A friend of mine gets mad and hits him on the trunk if they go.
And that's before hand gestures.
Yeah, or hand gestures, or you just fall on their hood with your bicycle. That's the other alternative.
Hopefully you initiate that, not the other way around.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, so we're diving into the kind of the last kind of data that we look at, and I know we're already at 45 minutes, so I'll give a high level overview of this, and please ask questions if you'd like to. So the next one is perception and satisfaction with the transportation system. So when we were coming up with the annual report, we thought, personal perceptions, attitudes towards the transportation system is important. And when we were developing those 80 different data points to look at how we're doing on progress, we were like, well, how do we integrate this? At the end, we decided, well, there's really only 5 or 6 questions that we need to ask because we don't have from another data source. So it doesn't really make sense to do our own separate transportation survey with only 5 or 6 questions. So let's glean what we can from the business and the resident survey that goes out every 2 years. And so that's what we've used for some of our metrics. So this first one is, well, let me back up a little bit. Which is good, right? We're duplicating efforts, we're being efficient. The downside of it is that there's some questions that don't relate completely to what's in the purview of the TMP or relate completely to transportation infrastructure. And here's a good example. So the rating of personal safety in different areas of Littleton, overall, the perception of safety was down a little bit when you compare 22 to 2018. Now, transportation infrastructure is a part of this, certainly, right? If you're walking down a narrow sidewalk with cars speeding by you, you probably don't feel very safe. But there's other elements that contribute to safety that are not necessarily transportation focused. So this is a piece of data that we look at to determine trends and things like that, but not one necessarily we would use to kind of, steer projects.
Traveling with an attorney did not show up on that list, but I understand it was rated very high.
Very high, yeah, I would agree.
This is my safety, sitting next to an attorney.
Too many attorneys on the seat. That's what it was.
Keep moving.
Sure. So then the next 2 questions talk about specific modes. So this does relate more specifically to transportation. So we asked in the business survey, we asked kind of the same question, what is your rating of satisfaction with these different modes? And we compared in our annual report 2022 to 2018. Overall, perceptions from the business survey were slightly up. And again, this is interesting. So if you look at ease of bus travel, you see that the perception of satisfaction actually went up from 2022 to 2018. So this is where we take it into consideration, right? But we're not hanging our hat on this necessarily. Something that is important to point out is traffic flow on major streets. Both in this question and the next question that's focused on residents, we'll see that went up. And I'll show you why that's important in just a second.
How big is the sample on that? Is there?
I'm not sure. So this is the resident survey that goes out. Does anybody?
Oh, so that's a part of that, okay.
Yeah, then we're pulling
It's probably substantial.
figures from that, so. And this is a very similar question that was asked to the residents, and so you see there's a little bit of difference. Questions relating to transit or transit stations are down, and understandably, given what we've talked about with RTD. Bicycle and pedestrian facilities are down a little bit, but again, this is something we're focusing on, that we're already kind of starting to tip those dominoes over. But again, ease of driving is the one in this one that went up. And so the reason that's important is because when we come to this last slide, this question asks for satisfaction of the transportation system based on low-income households. And so we can see there's a little bit of a discrepancy here when you look at overall numbers, right? Like traffic flow is better than it was, but then when you ask low-income households specifically, like, well, transportation service is actually down. We don't know exactly why this is. It could be that, in 2020 when there was nobody on the street, if you were, an essential worker and you had to be at work on time, it was great to get on I-70 and have, 30% of the cars that were there, right? But as traffic volumes have gone up, right, it's made it harder. So the point of this slide is really that if we want to have a transportation system that's inclusive, right, that serves all people, that we really need to make sure that we focus on demographics, surveying demographics that might be underrepresented, right? The people that don't typically show up to a public meeting, but that we want to make sure we're providing opportunities for those folks to access everything in our great city. So any questions before I go on to the next section? Any questions on the survey data?
What are the hash marks again?
The gray?
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are our goals. So yeah, we tried to cram a lot in these graphs. So we've got the 2022 in the teal, 2018 in dark blue, and then that hash mark, that's what our goal is based on the TMP metrics we set.
So would you say overall, taking all of these data points into account, things are better than they were? That it's more positive?
Yeah, so I would say, and I might tap Brent or Keith here, I'd say it's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, there's certain aspects that are better, certain aspects where the perception has gone down. But again, it's hard to know exactly kind of, not all those things are transportation specific, right? There's other factors that play into that, so.
The other thing too is I think we're gonna, for those of us in the industry, the next few years are gonna be interesting because we're still seeing the changes in traffic rebounds that are coming out of COVID. Like we talk in our office a lot, the AM peak is about the same as it was before COVID, but the PM afternoon peak is longer. It's more spread out than it used to be. So there's definitely changes in the pattern, and so we're really all kind of have our heads wrapped around what is that going to impact us as we go forward in the future.
Yeah, and so that's something, actually, that's a great segue, thanks Keith, into changes in transportation patterns. Yeah, so, one of the great things is that we have new technology that allows us to have traffic counts instantly, and so we can compare traffic before the pandemic to traffic now. Levels are pretty much back where they were in pre-pandemic traffic levels. The difference, as Keith mentioned, is in the distribution. They're distributed differently throughout the day, and a lot of that probably has to do with the way that people can work differently now post-pandemic. Similarly, so cars kind of saw this dip, and then the levels have returned now. Bikes and PED data that we have actually did the opposite. So when the pandemic first started, people walking and biking, especially for recreational uses, skyrocketed, and now we've seen that those numbers have kind of flattened out a little bit. Now, this is only recreational data that we get from South Suburban, but it's important to note. It's also important to note that other cities around us have seen an increase in the number of bike users, specifically e-bikes. And so as we plan infrastructure projects, maintenance, things like that, it's important to know that there's going to be more people who are getting on bikes, and a lot of those people tend to be the people who are interested but concerned. You've probably heard that phrasing before, right? So we need to make bike infrastructure that allows them to bike safely and comfortably. And then transit is a giant question mark. So we're kind of waiting, with bated breath to see what that long-term trend is with transit, so.
I have a question for Keith on transit. I haven't ridden RTD much since the pandemic, but one of the issues I hear is security is there any plans to address that?
Actually, I'll just, they have invested a lot in security over the last year especially. They've certainly got more officers on the ground. They've really worked to make some of their places that were problematic and less attractive to, uses that aren't preferred.
And that was a concern with the No Fair August that they ran. They were really concerned about that, and it, didn't fare that way. There wasn't many safety issues. They did have that increased ridership during that month.
Yeah.
And so that was a good outcome that they had with the increased ridership
And
and
did that
improved safety.
help him recover even more, a little bit maybe?
A little bit, it's a step in the right direction, I don't know.
Yeah, it did with ridership, but not with revenue.
Yeah.
It was a free month.
So
They still have
It was
to
about 9
operate.
million.
Well, they
They still have the
got-
staff.
Funded for it, it wasn't that they lost revenue.
But revenue from the riders.
Right, but it was subsidized with the state.
Well, it's heavily subsidized, no doubt
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Thank you, I just was curious.
Yeah, and so overall, just understanding these changing patterns is important, as we kind of see, is this the long term or are we going to return to pre-pandemic, but as we plan projects. So summary and next steps. So just kind of going back to the numbers that we talked about in the beginning, made progress on 61 of the 140 projects recommended at TMP. We've not made progress on the 13 programs and initiatives, but really after the TMP was adopted, we focused on getting some much needed capital work done. And as we go forward, focusing on these programs and initiatives will be one of the things we do. All 4 recommended transportation standards have been put in place and are updated on an ongoing basis, and 6 of the 7 recommended partnerships are currently in place, so. I'm gonna kind of skip around here at the end. So takeaways, the city has made significant progress on the projects that are recommended in the Transportation Master Plan. Especially as it comes to, or especially in terms of bike and pedestrian projects, and so we'll continue to kind of go down that route. Grant funding has played a major role in this. I think I don't have the exact number, but I think right now we have about $20 million in grant funded projects. So that allows us to do way more than we could do on our own.
How much grant funding do we have before the transportation master plan was in place?
Our total between 2000 and 2015 combined was $2 million.
And you said 20, right?
Mhm.
Is that what you said?
We've fared well against our peers. That's the other thing too. Part of all of this is making us a regional leader. From a planning standpoint, and being involved with that has allowed us to leverage that to become a critical regional partner to help us bring in more opportunities to be successful. So that's part of our game plan as well.
So 3A money is helpful.
That's what I was wondering, yeah.
That's a huge lever for us going forward.
Keith, what would you need to, you said 18 months for the bike and pedestrian plan, what would you need to push that forward?
We'd have to sit down with, the transportation planning staff and talk through. It's probably, for us, it would take some more staff time, because in all honesty, we're really maxed out trying to deliver $37 million in construction as well as keep the other planning opportunities underway. So that's a crux for us of where we're having to make decisions about what's a priority over the near term is definitely that.
And last few takeaways here, we continue to partner with RTD and kind of help them out and work with them whenever we can, but the future of transit is uncertain. Business surveys and responses, good metrics to track, but again, this is kind of showing us overall trends. But it does kind of point to the need for public engagement, and so we'll kind of get into that and some next steps. But public engagement is key. We want to engage stakeholders, City of Littleton residents, to make sure that we're delivering projects that are useful. So
Shane, I have a question on that,
Yeah.
on the grant again, 20 million. How much of that do we have now?
I'm not sure. So it's typically split up over several years. And I could go back and get that answer for you, but we've got projects that are kind of, right now we're just kicking it off. We're working with CDOT to get all the paperwork in place, all the way up to, we're in design and we're getting ready to do construction, buying right away, things
So
like
it's
that.
for projects across the board, it's not just, say,
Yeah.
bicycles or something?
No.
Yeah,
Okay, so it's across the board.
transportation, yeah.
That includes Mineral and Santa Fe, it includes other ones.
Oh, yeah, so you can spend that in a heartbeat
And
then.
some of them I'll try. Some of them,
Sure you will.
and some grants we get them and we build it and then get reimbursed. Other ones we're fronted. It just kind of depends on the mechanism of the grant. And that's been, Shane and Ken are living this more than anyone. It's been, the TIP process has been quite a dynamic adventure this year, plus supplemental money from the feds and I can't say enough about our staff's work to have us front and center on all that to continue that.
So on the budgeting, that you hope to get paid back by a grant, then
Oh, no, we wouldn't commit the funds if we didn't know the grant was there.
Okay, but we have a category for that in our
Yeah.
budget. And that's where you're putting it. So you don't spend it unless you know you're gonna be reimbursed.
Yeah, we're not gonna proceed, I mean, if we know a project, let's just, easy number, it was $1 million, and we know we're gonna get a $750,000 grant for it, we're not gonna proceed with that project unless we've got that signed IGA, with CDOT or whatever, so we know that money is guaranteed for us to come through to deliver the project.
With the tip process there, I know you've been in talk, Dr. Cog, have they started the county transportation forums, or are they doing it differently now? How is that?
Well, we actually have a little laugh about this in the office, because we're in 3 counties.
Right.
So we sit in 3 transportation forums, and Arapahoe County has had more than the other two completely combined, and I made the mistake of picking that one to start with. So that one's active every
Okay.
month. Every 2 times a month, the Arapahoe meets.
And
It's
is it just staff or are there elected officials?
No, there's a staff meeting, and then generally it's every other month right now, there's an executive level meeting.
Okay. And have you gone to those?
No, I haven't been,
Has he
no.
been
There was
getting-
there was a switch over recently, so, but we also have, if they've struggled to make quorums, so we did something a couple years ago where if we don't have our council member or their alternate, then I'm available to step in to help is a voting member for that, is the way that several cities have done it. Not me voting for other cities, that would be, kind of fun, but, so what we're doing is we're working, to get everybody aligned. There hasn't been a great number of meetings as of late, so we're gonna get people plugged in as we go forward with the process.
Okay, yeah. but
It's
make
been
sure to
months-
get
it's been months
informal-
since I've
Yeah,
received that.
cause Councilmember Valdez is the
And it's
liaison
been,
to those
it's been
forums.
months.
So we
Yeah,
get him the
I can tell you
information.
honestly, Douglas County and Jeffco cancel their meetings more often than they have them. Whereas Arapahoe County, I think, is trying to make up for that.
So how does our transportation board work with you and where do they play in this whole process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, we kind of run the gamut of things. We'll bring projects to them for feedback, that we're looking for feedback for. We really like to get overall direction from them. They advise you guys, and so kind of setting, policy and things like that is good. So we try to give them kind of a breadth of all the stuff that we're doing, without overwhelming them. So, I don't know that there's a particular focus, so we don't bring kind of every bike and ped project to them, right? And they're only here once a month, so it would be kind of hard to do that. It'd be very long meetings. But yes, we
Yeah,
kind
they
of,
bring you goals, objectives that they would like to see.
And in those lines, I'll acknowledge we have two of them in the audience here.
Right.
The chair, Dan Radulovich, and then I'll say the founding chair, Kent Bagley here with the Transportation Board, so.
So you talked about setting policy. Remember they came and talked to us, what, was it a year ago or something? It's been a while since we've heard from them.
Actually, they sent y'all a memo recently, I think. So, what we worked on with the TMB is they wanted to do kind of a quick report to you every 6 months.
Uh-huh.
And it's hard to get in front of council to do that, so they created a process where the board, creates basically a memo to council.
I don't remember such a memo.
I don't
At
remember
least in the last 14 months here.
Who we would welcome.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's part of the reason why we
They,
wanted to
they
have
just, started that process, they were just finishing the drafting of the memo.
it. So we have not received
Right.
said memo.
Oh, okay.
But we're going to pretty soon, okay.
That
And
was,
there's
that was
certainly-
kind of like Excel saying they don't do very large increases.
Exactly.
And with,
Take
while
the
we're talking about the board, how many, with boards and commission appointments coming up here? And we'll be interviews in a couple weeks, how many openings are on that?
I think that board, we have 3,
I thought it was 2.
4, but
Four.
part of that is because we recently had a member, step off the board because of personal commitments. So that was somebody whose term wasn't up, so we have 4
So there's 3 people that are,
continuing.
can reapply for reappointment, and when was the resignation?
Oh, just in the last couple months.
Well,
It was David Pulsford. This
how
last
many
couple-
months? I mean, this is the first I've heard of a resignation from the board, and I don't know if we,
It's been maybe 2 months at the most. He transmitted that to the board chair.
5 months.
5 months?
We usually hear about that
I
stuff.
would say, yeah, we usually hear, I mean, have you gone to the meetings, Jerry?
Not lately, not the last several months.
We'll make sure that goes through the
I
clerk
have
to get to you
conflict this
guys.
Thursday as well.
Because we need to know if
Yeah.
a board is shrinking to the point, or, for whatever.
But their attendance has improved. It was pretty rough for a while, but that's definitely, they have better attendance now, so they at least have the same number of staff that is at the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, having this meeting was important because we haven't had an update from the board, whether from staff or from liaison in a while, so
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to.
And I think an email is fine. I've been pushing for the Board of Commissions to meet with us for, once a year, the quasi judicial ones at least, and so that we understand what's going on and they understand kind of where council stands on the specific thing, but email's fine. I mean, it doesn't have to be a meeting.
Yeah, but also unless there's a problem and we need to appoint somebody, you know, that's what we definitely need to know at that point. If we
Right.
have to fill.
Yeah, if we have to
Yeah,
fill
it's-
something.
Like a planning commission, you know, we'd wanna make sure that they have enough folks.
Well, and certain
This one too.
boards and commissions have their own projects they work on, like I know HPB, we worked on projects and they reconcile with
They're very
council
busy,
goals through staff, but that's something probably we should be aware of
It's
too.
a very busy board, yeah.
Yeah, it's a busy board.
I'd like to see more emphasis from the Transportation Mobility Board on pedestrian and bike safety, since that plan's not coming for 18 months. Can we direct some resources or to direct that board to really put some ideas together?
Yeah, well, the bike and ped plan there's gotta be data and technical work, which a volunteer board wouldn't do. So we'd still have to create that with a consultant. We've gone to the board and spent time with them. That's one of the key things they talk about every month. Some of the restriping projects, for example, I think all of them rode their bike down the streets when we asked them for feedback. The board, it does take an active role in that. I'll put it out, if you want us to take on the bike and ped plan earlier, we're gonna have to talk about resources, because they would have to come from other things. Higher, other priorities, whether it's construction or something else, because we just don't have the staff to take that on
I don't think you should change your
at that
plan.
point.
I'm concerned because we don't have the big picture. I mean, I think bike safety is extremely important, I ride my bike, but I think taking it out of context, we need to look at all things before we try to push one thing up
Well, no,
above the other.
Well, so the way that we look at the transportation plan is, it's an overarching umbrella that covers all. And so in each of those areas, whether it's bike and pedestrian, bridges, engineering, there's a separate plan under each of those, which addresses the specifics, much like the chapters in the plan, that allows us to dive deeper into that, to have a specific plan that maps out where are the bike lanes, where's the connectivity issues. And like right now, we have the trail connectivity study ongoing, which is gonna allow us to take a look at how our bike and pedestrian infrastructure intertwines with our parks in the region and our system today. And that's a developmental step for the next stage in the bike and ped plan.
And I just think we need to not look at it in isolation, but
Well, it wouldn't be looked at in isolation, because it would fall under the principles of the transportation master plan.
But what I'm hearing from you, if we wanted to push one aspect forward, that would require reallocation of resources, which the other three areas might not get the resources they need.
We're gonna do plans under those areas. The resources, most of our resources right now, to be honest with you, are going to support construction. Because we're gonna do 10 times as much construction as we've ever done. So that's where our resources are being applied. And we're pursuing grants, we're continuing to do that, but at the end of the day, we still only have so much capacity. And so we can accelerate the bike and ped plan, but certainly there's
Cost of something else, so.
I think
Yeah.
it's important that we note this.
Yeah, my concern is less
interest.
about the bikes and more about the pedestrian safety piece around our sidewalks. So I think, and even in the transportation mobility plan, the sidewalks are in disarray. And so there's 40% that aren't ADA compliant and that are broken or missing. That's one thing, safety piece that I think we should address. We have
So-
more folks, especially in District 2, that are walking along those things and they're dangerous. And I'd be curious to see what injuries in that report we have from folks slipping on sidewalks.
Well, there's a difference here. So this goes back to the fact you have an old city.
Correct.
So there is a whole bunch of infrastructure out there that would never be built today. You got rollover curb everywhere. And we have spaces where they built 2-foot sidewalks next to a park, or no connectivity to a park. And that's, right now, we're taking that on with the connectivity study. We're also planning on doing, much like we did the PCI work that we talked about a couple of weeks ago for the pavement management assessment, we're planning to do that for the sidewalk system as well. So we have that level of data in the sidewalk system to continue to build that out, to address the gaps in the system, to put our money into those areas to make that work. We also take those as targets of opportunity. When we're doing some other work, we're getting in there to do the sidewalks when we can. We can't fix every sidewalk in this town to make it ADA compliant, because we don't have enough right of way. We'd have to go out and acquisition right away from homes, for example, to take some of that stuff on. But that's where we have to find the priorities and try and build out the network as much as we can. And that's where the bike and pedestrian the bike and pedestrian plan gets into that in detail. It gets into that sidewalk section in detail and meets with the community and works through that. That's the intent of that plan. And I agree, we have a massive struggle here on the pedestrian side. I'll be honest, my assessment as a public works professional is there's a massive amount of infrastructure built in the city that nobody cared about anything but a car. And it
Right.
shows. But we can't build, the challenge for all of us is we can't build our way out of that overnight because it took us 90 years to get here. So we're working on it. And if you look at what we've done, I mean, we made significant progress on a 40-year plan just in the last 2 years, and we're continuing to chase that down. And so we pursue, one of the challenges is there isn't a lot of money out there for sidewalk grants, for example. So we're certainly trying.
And numbers on, you're concerned about the incidents and stuff, those numbers are available. So you can see if there's a hot spot.
Could I get some supplemental information around
sure.
what you're already doing or what's going in the works?
Sure.
Of specifically around sidewalk safety, because those are our, when we think of our inclusion work, I mean, those are our people pushing strollers, those are our folks in wheelchairs and our friends who have walking canes, who are blind. So a one-page memo would be awesome.
Sure.
To highlight that information so we can disseminate that and elevate that and let people know that the city is working on it and that we care about them.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Manager.
Thanks. Probably, and we'll be talking about the itinerary for the council's retreat on the next item, but probably the largest segment of time is planned for council's discussion of priorities like this. I mean, we're certainly noting this, and we're gonna be looking at the transportation plans even for this year in the light of this conversation. But part of the prep for the retreat is kind of that update on current projects, priorities, and under each area, for instance, in public works. So I think when we have that conversation about priorities, council will also have information about those other projects that are in the work plan for this year, because many of the things that the department's working on this year, are needed for the next steps in the ultimate build out of the transportation system. So lots of good opportunity for more discussion.
It's an exciting time because we're actually have money to make a difference. So, I mean,
Last slide now?
I've got my, if you guys are ready for it.
Let's see it.
Yeah, and I can kind of hit these quickly, but next steps, we're gonna continue to advance the 61 projects, construction is ideal, but as we do the update, we'll see how those priorities shifts and we'll adjust accordingly. Annual internal assessments of policies, programs, things like that, we've grown a lot, the transportation group, Public Works has grown a lot, and so with that, we wanna make sure to have regular check-in points where we're saying, is our neighborhood traffic management program, is it good, could we be doing it better, things like that. Plans are a big thing. The TMP gave us an overview of all our transportation needs. Going forward, corridor studies will help us get down to that next level of granularity, and so that'll be a focus moving forward. Grant funding, transportation grants typically return our dollars 4 to 1, which is a pretty good investment. If you can find another investment that's good, let me know. And then when it comes to bike and ped, that return is even better.
Stock.
What's that?
Never mind. Made a killing on one.
Okay. That return is 9 to 1 when we do bike and ped projects. So
9 to 1 for bike.
yeah, so a lot of the grants we're applying for, if it's purely bike and ped through TIP, rather than requiring a 20% local match, they only require a 10% local match. So, but it's very strict. As soon as you start to touch vehicle capacity, you're no longer eligible for that additional benefit. So. Utilize best practice with public engagement. During the pandemic, we found out, we couldn't do the typical public meeting, right? The open house, so we did online surveys, we did kind of self-guided virtual public engagement. We still now do the open houses, but we also go to people where they're at. So when there's events downtown, we go there. Hey, you're having a good time with your family. You got 3 minutes to tell us what you think about this plan. So we're reaching a lot more people, and we've seen that. We've seen the fruits of that on several projects. We'll continue to do that. Advance the city's use of technology. So understanding those traffic patterns that we talked about. Before we've got these these great cameras at a lot of our major intersections that are automatically counting traffic. So I could go pull up traffic at those major intersections from yesterday and tell you in a few minutes. You know, before that technology, we were paying somebody thousands of dollars to go do that. So continuing to use that to be more efficient. And then the last one is just investing in staff training. And so it's for better project delivery, but also to ensure that we're technical experts. We love our consultants. We work with really good consultants. But at the end of the day, you know, it takes us about $1 to do what it takes a consultant $2 to $2.50 to do. Of course, there are projects we have to use consultants for, but that just helps us be better stewards of the taxpayer dollar if we can be technical experts and do some things in-house, so.
As far as vehicle counting, can you also count bicycles, that kind of stuff? I mean, whether there's a bike lane or not, to see where the busy spots are?
Yeah, so one of the advantages of having digital cameras is that they can update the software. And so just recently, we upgraded our cameras at major intersections to identify where we think bikes and peds will be traveling. And then those cameras can detect based on the size of the object that goes through that zone. It counts them. So it's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty accurate. So yeah.
You do enough to it to at least count the numbers and see if you need to focus on that area.
Yeah, exactly.
What about Denver Water? I know that's gonna throw you a big curve when that happens on Main Street.
Well, I have some exciting news.
Oh, get out of here.
Good, excited, or bad excited?
Exactly.
Exciting, we
Are we now?
today, the team made the selection today for the consulting team that's going to be doing the design work in the downtown mobility study. So that project will be underway soon. So that Jim's gonna send that out this week in his update, but we made that decision and started the contracting process just today.
I mean, as far as rerouting during the,
No designing, the streetscape, the mobility, all of that big study that we're planning.
no, I'm talking about Denver Water when they come in and tear things up. I mean, that's.
That'll be part of that.
That's part of it?
Do you know when that's gonna when they're gonna tear it up?
I'm not gonna say in public, I don't wanna jinx myself.
One thing we didn't address is something that you had mentioned was the Santa Fe and what kind of input do we wanna give? Is it CDOT that's working on this study or it's the Pell study? Do we want it to be a major freeway? Do we want more stops so it's not so high traffic? None of that
You took
conversation.
the words right out of my mouth. That's what I was gonna see if council had any other questions or comments.
I was gonna ask about that, yeah. I don't know where we are on that or when we're gonna talk about that or
Well-
even they would listen to,
Keep
who
on the
listens
go.
to us?
The
They better listen to us.
PL's done.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, the PEL is not the design of how it works, that's kind of the actual finished design of what it's gonna be.
The PL is the concept of what that corridor is gonna look like for the future. That corridor is a CDOT state and federal highway, we don't control that, and it's an expressway. And so you can already see, we're already doing 3 projects that came out of the PL that are helping with safety.
Well, I think that it was sold to us as the PEL is the first step in this, this is
The concept plan, and that's why we need the projects have not
Right.
been
Yeah.
designed.
And so, to see what it could look like or what option, it was all recommendations of not, this is exactly what it's gonna look like.
Right, but are you trying, okay, so the question is do you wanna go a completely different direction than
Well-
what's in there?
Perhaps.
I'll just put the question out
Yeah,
there.
perhaps in some ways yes, it's a US highway and so it's different than Broadway or other places, but what benefit to Littleton does it have to be, a channelized expressway without stopping? I mean, we need to, that was the transportation part, where is the economic development team brought into that? What's the benefit to downtown Littleton if those cars don't stop and they just go by
So-
55 miles an hour?
Well, I'll just speak off the cuff here, it's, you have plans in there that address intersections at Prince, at Bowles, that help with that, but those will be designed eventually. The other part of it is you have to also think about the impact of, you have no other north-south corridors that move through this town until you get to Broadway. So if you neck that expressway down, which is very possible to do, and turn it into a boulevard theoretically, then that traffic has to go somewhere else, and it's gonna go through other parts of your community. That traffic will still be there, because there's 2 misnomers I've seen on this. Our own economic development data says that a huge percentage of our citizens leave this community every day to work. They're a contributor to that, and they're coming home that way. It's not just people that are passing through our town. So that's why, for example, we talked about at Bowles, and one of the concept ideas that's out there for Bowles and Santa Fe is a cap and cover, which would basically continue downtown all the way to the river.
A cap and cover.
Cap and
What does that
cover.
mean?
You grade separate it so that your pedestrian and bike level stays at the same level as downtown and works its way to the river. And your transportation is at a different grade level. The car
That's
transportation.
super expensive, cause you told us that.
That's correct,
Yeah.
but it's no more expensive than doing other interchanges. Plus, there's some definite right-of-way issues out there no matter what you do.
Yeah, and I think the issue that Councilmember Go was talking about, there have been no alternatives A, B, C, this is what's proposed, cap and cover could do. What about turn it into a boulevard? What does that look like? How does that fit into the?
I would suggest that those alternatives of changing it from an expressway to a boulevard were covered as potential alternatives during the PL. And the mayor pro tem at that time certainly was sitting on the executive committee for that.
Keith, what I'm gonna say, I would like staff to
roundabouts.
to listen. I think while the Pell is complete, we do have some opportunities. We will, as projects are designed, the largest projects are still, 5 to 10, 12 years out in terms of, actual completion of design. We know what the challenges are with CDOT and the corridor that Santa Fe is. At the same time, I think we do have some opportunity to influence as we go forward, especially if the council is interested in thinking about our best opportunities to create a different feel on Santa Fe. So I hear the question from council, if council has some discussion for us, it's important that we hear those concepts and that we start to think of how we can influence that for the future.
I mean, I think that coming from the results of the PEL, it was basically saying, hey, this is what CDOT has said. And, granted, if you said former mayor pro tem, that was a previous council, I wasn't, half the council wasn't on council at that time and get that information. To have some feedback back of, well, what's best for Littleton?
Yeah, today. Today.
Right, today. I mean, so, it may be what it is proposed, it may be different alternatives in different spots there. But I think that I've heard from, residents and some people on council that, this is being, more of an expressway being pushed through there. Sure, maybe in certain parts of it makes sense, but right through our downtown, that seems to go against the trend nationally of, putting expressways through downtown urban areas, trying to get rid of them there. Make it so it's more inviting for people. And maybe a cap and cover can do that, but I'm just saying, we haven't really seen.
Why is it C4, like you said, that it's gonna force people to use Broadway? Well, I don't know that that's the case either, cause there's so many traffic lights. That's what C470 is for, that's what I-25 is for. You may have to drive a little bit farther, but you're going faster. It doesn't work that way, okay.
Sounds easy.
We'll see.
Is there something,
I think this is for another day.
It is.
yes, it's not for today.
Transportation.
I just bring it up as a topic of, maybe it's something we could discuss before it's a
Kent will
total
figure it
done
out
deal.
first.
Kent will figure it out.
As long as you can. I'm sorry? Deliver a solution.
I already know what the solution.
But
Good.
maybe something
you're-
that we can address at another, I don't know what the next, a study session, whatever.
Councilmember Burke?
Yeah, and thank you guys. I know we interjected a lot into
That's
your
right.
presentation, but I think one great thing we could talk about too, was highlighted in the presentation, is that we really don't know what RTD's future looks like. And, I was being a little bit facetious before, but like it is really uncertain financially and just technically and logistically. But that being said, we also see a lot of our residents in that low income portion of the survey that you were indicating, seeing, worsening transportation options as a result. I think it's still important to take advantage of the mass transit opportunities that we still do have and solidifying those opportunities where they do exist, even with the, uncertainties of these smaller cross-connecting lines being kind of up in the air at this point. So, when we talked about like surveying and getting good information and resident feedback, this is something I've brought up with the city manager in the past, is that in our process of surveying, we may consider setting aside portions of that survey related to transportation specifically, so we can get at a little bit more targeted information rather than using kind of proxy information on like downtown safety, but rather specifically asking about transportation related things on especially on mass transit, because quite honestly, we just don't know what people are thinking or doing at this point. I don't think RTD has a good grasp on it yet either. No one does, and that's okay, but we can still do some part in our city to facilitate better access to these corridors, to mass transit options that we know will exist in the future. And I think we can double down on those options and still,
That's what you hoped the
hedge
RT was gonna do. Now it's up in the air.
well, I mean, yeah, like a lot of RTD stuff, they're cutting back a lot of the lateral service lines, they're cutting back the smaller ridership numbers, but they're still keeping a lot of these main arterial kind of transportation networks, including the Broadway corridor, alive. And while BRT may not necessarily be the right move in the next 5 years, we should still be kind of engaging residents in that kind of survey and feedback material, like process to say, is this on the horizon? Should we still be planning for BRT? I mean, I think we should, but like, we would wanna have data to support the engineering going in that direction. Sorry, I'll stop.
I have one more.
Steve, you said a lot there.
One more question, Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, Shane, just for the fifth bullet point down, public engagement, kind of like what Steve was saying. When you are going to people anecdotally and gathering feedback, can you make sure you're going to bus stops? Talking to people at the bus stops.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I just have to say, the long and short of it is so much of our public transportation takes you downtown and doesn't take you where you
The
need to.
road to Denver, it's always been.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it does. Having grown up in a town where you took the bus everywhere, it went everywhere. Our buses don't go everywhere in our public transportation. Is limiting. Just saying.
It's not Keith's fault though.
No, it isn't. It was just the way it is.
Overall perception.
Alright, thank you.
Good stuff.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We need a break?
Yeah,
Okay, we need a break, so we'll take a quick 5 minutes, we'll come back at 8. it's 8:01 and we're back. So next item is council retreat preparation. And so we'll have city manager and assistant city manager kind of present some of the ideas of, or, lay the groundwork for the retreat that's coming up here in 2 weeks here. So.
Thanks, Mayor. This was billed as 30 minutes, but depending on council discussion.
Might be 75.
It's 15, right.
There we go.
Yeah, right.
Let's not go up.
So the purpose of our session is really just to check in with council as a group. I've had conversations with most of you just about topics and kind of our agenda, but I wanted a chance to kind of give a little preview, make sure that if there are other ideas that we hear those, or if there are questions that we answer those. So if you could click along, go ahead. Thanks. So just as a reminder, the retreat is planned for the 10th and 11th of February. That's Friday and Saturday. Friday will be a shorter session planning from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock. And then Saturday, the 11th from 9 to 5. And as any good city manager knows, we really should end prior to 5 p.m. So that's a long end of that day. Hopefully it will not be that long. It will be at the Courtyard by Marriott down on County Line Road. I think they're well set up for this kind of event. And our facilitator, I know all of you know David Marvin and have had some conversation with him. He has experience with our council, so I think he's well equipped to help us through the program. Just our draft agenda, and this still has some looseness in it. We'll be finalizing the agenda and the timing over the next 2 weeks. I know David Marvin's on vacation for this week, but I'm looking forward to catching up with him. I know he had those conversations with you, so we'll be able to kind of dial this in when he's back next week. But the concept is that on Friday, we would have a welcome, kind of have some council check-in, just with each other about the agenda. That might be the time. I know traditionally council has some time just to kind of talk about if there are anything to bring up about how council works, how the meetings work. Staff will be prepared to talk about things like remote participation, any questions that council's had there. As if you have things about the way council's working, that might be the time to have some of those conversations. Then I think we'll also have just a short recap of the Envision Littleton process, as that will be fundamental to some of the vision alignment work that we're planning for the next day. And then we'll also kind of give an overview of that framework, which we're giving kind of a very short overview of tonight, so that when we get back on Saturday, council will be ready to jump into that strategic framework. And I'll skip those bullet points for now because we'll spend a minute more on them in subsequent slides here. But we also want to make some time, and I know through conversation with you, we heard these ideas, things that staff has known council may wish to talk about. Throughout these 2 days, we might do one of these on Friday if there's time. But we are trying to create some space for conversations about 3 topics: the authorities, boards, and commissions, and we'll have kind of a list of our current boards, our current ABCs and their purposes. The observation I think I'd have, and I've heard from others, is that there's been a lot of change. There's been a few boards added over the past couple years. It might behoove council to just get back up on the balcony, look at all of the boards and commissions. If there are conversations to be had about the numbers of boards and commissions we have, are there some that could be consolidated? Are there any that we need that we haven't, we don't have yet? And also, I think the topic I've heard is, how does council engage with our authorities, boards, and commissions? Should we have more regular study session updates with at least several of the boards and commissions that have probably the most substantive work to ensure kind of consistency with council's vision and direction. I think there's a range of ways that council could enhance connection with boards and commissions, from those study session conversations to things like regular written updates, emails, just on what the boards are focused on, so that council has that collective understanding and can make sure that that the work of the boards and commissions are aligned with your vision. So that's that conversation. The council appointee review processes, that would be the review processes that the council uses for the city attorney and city manager. So you'll have your first one. Yeah, you've talked about the wheel of
the wheel of
evaluation. Yeah. Take a spin.
That's what you asked for.
But you'll have your first one with me coming up probably this summer. And we want to just kind of have some conversation about what's important to council and what the process might look like, not actual, evaluations of either of your appointees, at least at the retreat.
Poll,
right?
airing grievances.
And then finally, we want to make some time. We'll have I've heard that there's a list and there's kind of an ongoing conversation about potential ballot measures. We want to check in with council, because should council have any wish to move a ballot question forward for, say, this November, it's now in the year that we need to get started with the planning for that. So staff doesn't have any preconceived notions or recommendations on those at this time, but we just want to make sure that there's time for council to kind of have some conversation about where we've been and those items that have been on the maybe list that might be time for.
Can you provide a list or
Yes, we'll have
Historic council has anything.
the list.
Yeah, you guys to get this on.
Yeah.
Talk about it now, because we can't wait till August,
Right.
It's
Like
been
we've
done.
done
Oh,
before.
we should have done that.
So then, the main focus for the retreat will be kind of checking in with where we've been over the last 3 years and making sure that we have alignment with the Envision Littleton plan, the comp plan. This is the vision from that comp plan. Since then, a lot of work has been done, and council has developed goals and objectives. And the general concept for this is that there are a few steps we can take and work through, starting with the vision, checking with council about that vision, have some conversation as necessary, but then get into how this vision kind of is translated into operations with council priorities being prominent there, and then how it actually connects up with staff work plans. That's my 10-second version of where we're going here. So if we start with the vision from the Envision process, I'm not asking you to read through this right now in the time we have, but the idea, as I said, is kind of taking a look at those outcome statements for Envision Littleton, some of those kind of long-term principles, and then the current council goals and objectives. And those were all developed with certain purposes in mind. But I think this is an opportunity for council to step back and say, okay, given all that work, given the 15 different terms that are, say, on the left side there, can we distill those down into, say, a handful of outcome statements that we feel are really going to drive that vision forward for the long term? And then once we end those outcomes, well, let's move to the next slide. So the outcomes, as I said, are really a product or a consolidation of the work that's been done. Next slide, please. And go back one, please. So the outcomes then will really, if you want to think of what these could be, I would say that flowing from the vision statement, what do we as an organization need to be creating? What are the impacts that we need to have on the community over the long term to achieve that vision? So these are going to be the big broad kind of service areas, things that, you know, the outcomes that we want to have. We want to be safe, we want to have high quality infrastructure, big statements like that. There will be significant room later, as you'll see, for some of the shorter term priorities that council has. But outcomes will kind of will make up that first operational driver for where we're going. Next one, please. Also, we'll make some time, once we've identified those outcomes, for council to kind of step out of your council and your knowledgeable role and think for a minute about, how do we know if we're getting there? You know, kind of what, if you were your neighbor, what would success look like when we talk about creating a safe community? You know, just really kind of intuitive things. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it, but I think we're interested in, you know, capturing what does success look like. Staff can then come back and do what staff does and come up with kind of the more detailed outcome indicators that we think, you know, we'll check those back with council. But those will be the long-term kind of indicators that we can measure each year for, you know, whether we're moving the needle. How do we know if we're being successful? So that'll be that section. Then I think we'll probably spend the most time on checking in with council on your priorities. The goal is, or I think the concept is, if you've been able to outline those big, broad outcomes that aren't going to change very much from year to year, then you can be probably even more streamlined and focused with staff on what you as a council want to achieve over the next, you know, 2 or 3 years. What are your priorities? You know, and I think your priorities now cover a lot of ground. And I think if some of those priorities, some of the things, you know, I certainly have heard from you that of your current goals and objectives, there are some things that are probably even more important than others to the majority of the council. I think this framework should allow us to, once we've taken care of those big picture outcomes, focus on those consensus priorities the council might have for the shorter term. The matrix there is just the graphic from the resident survey that we'll have at the retreat that gives you some sense for those quality versus importance from the residents. I think along with your priorities, we want to hear and make sure that we do some brainstorming around, you know, what are the concrete projects, goals for the next 2 or 3 years. Probably complementing council's goals, the 2 to 3 year goals, following the retreat. Staff can also fill in things that might not come to council's mind, but also, you know, along with council's goals, will drive those outcomes at the top of the page that we saw. So we'll probably spend a significant amount of time on what your priorities and near-term goals are, so that we can kind of set up the budget process for next year. And then finally, you know, this won't be a big part at the retreat. You'll certainly have the current staff work plans, but the goal in the end is for council's priorities and these outcomes to drive the work that staff does each year. So once we have this set, we'll be able to go back and make sure that all the work that we're doing is aligned with what we've heard from council in the rest of that framework. So that in a few minutes is kind of that framework. I wanted to introduce it tonight. If you have any questions, things that, you know, you want to kind of question tonight, that's certainly what we'd like to hear. Any ideas, any of those agenda items you'd like to ask about, additional things you'd like us to be thinking about as we finalize the agenda. But I think we'll have a good day and a half that'll help us move forward.
One thing that comes to my mind, and it's conversations we've had, is on is council goals, and they're all equal. And do we want them to be all equal, or do we? I don't know. I'm throwing it out. It seems like some priorities have changed.
Which are after mine.
I think that's part of the
Yeah.
discussion to have
Yeah.
is for council to have more of a discussion of what's important to us and to the community, the idea to tie everything back to the envision plan there, to make sure things that we're doing fit with what the community wants, because we're represented. But we can prioritize, hey, this, we wanna put this above this is more important.
Yeah, I mean, I just toss it,
I think there will be dots at the retreat. There will be what, I'm
like
saying
we
that
put the dots
facetiously.
on,
Because once you've done some brainstorming, it's certainly staff's interest that we hear some prioritization. So we'll find some ways, I know David is thinking of ways that once we have done some brainstorming, you know, it's important that we understand which of those ideas has some consensus majority support from council first. But then even within that list, which really are probably are the most important things from council. And because all of those, to the extent they're new things, will have to be developed further by staff so that when we get into the summer and you're doing your budgeting, we can be clear about what those things are what it's gonna take to get those things done.
because it could go different ways where we take off goals, I mean, I don't know, we add goals, I don't know. Or maybe one goal has fewer tasks than another goal has more depth of task, I don't know how it's gonna look.
But it was my take to kind of almost have a clean slate and come up with new goals and
Oh, starting from
well, I
scratch.
mean, we may get to the same point, but to have council have direction, because, I mean, the previous 2 years with, you know, COVID, the retreats and everything was scattered, you know, doing it throughout the year, and then
We had a good retreat last year.
we had a retreat last year, and that was, you know, I talked to Jim, it was kind of council, you know, staff basically presenting to council, these are the goals that the previous council had, does it still work? And we kind of like thumbs up, thumbs down, it was kind of us responding to staff's telling us previous council goals, and that worked fine, but I think this is to give us a little more
Yeah.
ownership of saying, hey, these are the things that we have, you know, we've had a year working together, what is our priority, what's the community's priority, how we're gonna move forward, and to think of also not just the next year, but it's 2 to 3 years, because the 2023 budget was approved last year, and so if we say we want this done, it's not necessarily staff's not gonna say we're gonna drop everything and turn and do that because it's already been budgeted. We need to think in kind of a 2 to 3 year block of how we're gonna move forward with stuff.
And you'll have status updates on the current goals and objectives, and you'll have that as part of your binder, which I understand is a part of the retreat that we're building in our offices.
You know, lots of binders.
You'll have binders, you'll have all that backup, you'll have the work plans for this year, you'll have updates on your goals and objectives. You'll have clearly what those are, but as the mayor said, it'll be a lot less of staff presenting. In fact, we're not planning any staff presentation. Staff will be there on Saturday to field questions and, you know, participate as council would like. But it is intended to be more organic from you as to what those more focused priorities might be.
And then are we gonna get the binder ahead of time so we can look at
Yes.
it? When do we expect it, that we might get it?
Probably a week or so in advance.
It might be a good idea we've done the brainstorming session before, to bring up what we've done in the past, to just get us saying, are any of these things even still valid, you know? Or can we scratch a couple of them off?
That's yeah.
I also envision maybe some of them will be just less important because times have changed.
Sure.
Council's changed.
Yeah, and I think it's what, I mean, it was my hope that, you know, every council member would come up, hey, these are the things that, you know, are important to me or important to my constituents that I've heard a lot from, and then come as a group to make sure that a majority of council say, yeah, we wanna move in that direction, and, you know, maybe if it's Jerry comes and says that he's heard that he wants a big statue in Aberdeen Village of himself, yeah, the rest of the council goes, no, I don't wanna do that. Not this year.
Support
You support that?
Support that.
You have to raise your own money for it.
And then we'll come back and tell you that this is how much money it will cost.
Right.
Equity and inclusion will be on my list, right? Like that won't be a surprise to anybody.
Imagine
Equity and
that.
inclusion. You know, that won't be a surprise, but I will be talking about that and how that fits, I think, as an outcome.
Well, and I think and that is important as a goal, but I think it's also important, how does it fit with the city manager's goals and the staff's goals? Because they have things that they have to do, and our goals can't be just totally off the chart. I think your goal that you're talking about there, I think that's something that's very important to the staff too.
Well, and it's nomenclature too, it's not necessarily a goal, that's the outcome.
It's a big,
That's part of that vision statement,
Mhm.
is we want a safe community, we want an inclusive community. And then we drill down of what does that mean? So kind of changing our language.
Right, but you're saying, well, this is a part of that. Yeah.
Well, and also too, I think we need to keep in mind what our basics, that we can't lose sight of the fact that we're supposed to be doing roads and, all the basics we have
City
to
charter.
cover. And then what can we do on top?
And that, yeah, I think everyone, I would ask, read the city charter, read the envision plan to make sure what we're putting fits in with the community's, the function of the city and the community's desires.
Good plan.
I like it.
yeah, should be a good day, couple days.
Jim, just Kyle, I am coming from work. I clock out right at 2:00, so I might be a few minutes late. Just start without me. I'm right down the road.
Wait, you thought we were gonna
Close.
hold up for you?
No, don't hold up for me.
The city's
Get it
waiting,
going.
city's waiting for
Just like
Kelly.
hook them up to something.
Any other
Oh, good.
questions for
I'll get south.
Oh, good.
Kind of scheduling and layout of the retreat.
And, yeah,
What's that again?
Any other questions kind of on the format, the agenda of the retreat? I know everyone's spoken with David.
We didn't mention the axe throwing, that was
Axe
gonna be,
throwing?
yeah, it's the axe
We
throwing.
need to bring Randy back to the act. No, yeah, you weren't even here with Randy when I mentioned.
It's a trust thing, Stan.
Axe throwing. Okay,
trust falls.
city manager, thank you, assistant city manager.
Yeah, very
You-
good.
Well done.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you. Good job.
The manna of the world.
Any reports, city manager?
And since we are in a meeting, I should just bring up or, take the opportunity to update. I know I've been updating council on the library situation, contamination. At this point, I feel like we are in step with, pretty much with our county health department, and we're working with the state, who is trying to really adapt, I think, and pivot from the purpose of their regs related to methamphetamine contamination, which has been much more, and as we're hearing, almost exclusively about homes and cook locations, meth houses, to use that term. And they really haven't, they haven't had a call to develop these other regulations and standards. So they're working with us to give us some very specific customized advice, as they have for the other libraries with this experience, that will save us some time and money from having to follow those same regulations that would require very extensive testing. Rather, we're hoping to have a sanction plan from CDPHE on some very focused testing. That along with some health risk assessment and advice that we expect to be coming from the health department, should give us what we need to come up with a timeline for safely reopening our libraries.
So does this need to be rulemaking within CDPHE or the Arapahoe County, or does there need to be legislation within the session? Do we need to contact
Yeah,
legislation?
at this point, I can't speak for CDPHE, obviously, but what we're hearing is that they aren't even sure. They're trying to help. They realize that this is gonna be a statewide need. They've told us, and we know this, that their process for a comprehensive response to these kinds of situations could take months. And we say, we need this in days, and they understand that. So working with the county health departments, that's why they're at this point giving assistance based on the specific circumstances of the preliminary testing. For what it's worth, all the health officials we've heard from, when they look at our test results, they are comparatively very low and minor. I won't say minor, but they're relatively low on the scale of the parts per million for these particles. And
But in the big picture, longer term, do we
Yeah.
do we need to raise this to
We don't know
metro
yet.
mayors or to CML to say is there a bigger
Let's-
solution to that?
I would encourage us to get through this narrow window with our own
First things
circumstance.
first, yeah.
And then I think it will take, some additional work.
It might be worth just CML for the future, I mean, probably not for this session maybe, but
Mhm.
for the future. Do you know if Boulder's open yet, Boulder Library?
They are, and what they've done, which is kind of what we think we hope to be able to do, they've closed off those restrooms and any areas that are contaminated, and they've reopened,
Wonderful.
so.
Are there libraries testing?
They completed their testing. We did hear the news that the Pikes Peak Library District, which has 15 libraries, has decided to test. So that'll be the largest challenge for CDPHE and, so far.
Is that Colorado Springs?
Colorado Springs, sorry. So, we feel that we took the right steps out of an abundance of caution for the health concerns that we were hearing. And we're learning, and we feel like the health department is engaged with us, and we hope to have a path forward very soon.
What about businesses? I mean, when I think of Starbucks, for instance, when I was there last 2 weeks ago, where there's plenty of homeless folks going in and out of the bathrooms and there for a while. And then as the police helped to move them on, they were backfilled by a whole nother group of folks coming in.
Right. Not having public health expertise, but being part of the conversations I have in the last week, I think the jury's out on the advisability of, the health risks and the threshold of activity at which testing is recommended.
I think the city's not gonna tell businesses right now to test.
Right.
They make recommendations though.
I think we're
Where's
about
the room from first?
that the county health department will kind of take that role as it's presented, I think we'll know more and have more to say, we're really trying to, I do think, as the mayor says, it's important that we're not espousing public health expertise, and we are gonna take guidance, and we shouldn't act without guidance from the county health department and CDPHE at this point.
Well, absolutely, it has to be in concert with them. But this isn't a new thing. I mean, property managers have been dealing with this for
Right.
a long time.
Yeah.
So this is nothing new.
And it's not necessarily relegated to the homeless community.
That's it, absolutely, 100%
Oh,
right.
absolutely, absolutely.
No, and nor is it libraries. I mean, you mentioned Starbucks, McDonald's, King Soopers, Safeway, any restroom that's open to the public, for the public to use,
Our museum.
most likely,
Yeah.
going to have some sort of thing. I mean, from a city, as far as a risk perspective, I mean, when we have, evidence that something's going on, of course, yeah, that should obviously cause some alarms, but we haven't seen anything over in our library that would cause us concerns or the museum for that matter, to raise kind of these red flags like, holy cow, we have like a problem. It's just, unfortunately, it's kind of an epidemic across the United States. It's not a Littleton issue per se or a homeless issue per se. It's happening everywhere. So,
So that's my report.
City attorney?
no report, thank you.
I came out wrong, sorry.
I just wanna add one thing, I'll mention it next week at the meeting, going to the Metro Mayor's caucus exec committee, so I get more meetings.
Congratulations.
That's why you make the big bucks.
Better for you.
Yeah, that's it. Alright, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Oh, you bet.